information security is a big part of enterprise risk management. Just imagine how you'd feel if you lost your mobile phone. You might feel even worse if you had your data on, you couldn't get to it. But then think about what happens if you're a corporate person, you've got a corporate IT phone, you lose the physical asset, or you lose the information asset on it. Even worse, somebody else gets access to the information. So how can you try and ensure that you comply with standards, guidance, frameworks? How do you know what to pick? There's lots of things out there. One of the things is international standards. So I'm very pleased to say Jade's here to talk about standards, international standards, what's out there, how we go for them. I'm certified auditor Jade from brand compliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this session. My name is Jade Reiling, or Jade is easier to pronounce. And today I am representing brand compliance from the Netherlands. And brand compliance is a certification body that conducts audits for several standards. Now I know that the word audit is somewhat a dirty word, I guess, but yeah, that's what we call it. So yeah, I will use that term during this presentation a lot. What is on the agenda for today? I will give you a brief introduction onto who is brand compliance, what do we do, where do we focus on, and I will tell you a bit about my own role within brand compliance. Then I move on to the standard itself, the ISO19770-1 framework. Also explain a little bit what a management system standard, what the concept exactly means. And also the PDCA cycle approach, which is an important element of management system standards in general. I will also explain on a very high level basis what you need to do to implement this standard for ITS management, and also point out what the benefits and reasons are for implementing this framework and also become certified. And last but not least, of course, I will also tell you everything about the certification journey, what the different steps are throughout the process. Now, I'm open to answer all of your questions. Not sure what is, if we have to do it after the presentation or maybe along the presentation, we will see. But I'm happy to answer all of your questions. So yeah, let's start with brand compliance. Like I said, we are a certification body, a accredited certification body, and our focus lays on standards in the field of quality, information, security, and privacy. So consider, for example, ISO 9001, which is a quality management system standard, but also 27001, the standard for information security. And also, for example, the BC 5701, which is our own GDPR certification standard developed by our CEO. In my role within brand compliance, I mainly focus on standards around quality and information security, and therefore also the ITAM standard, because it's kind of a mix between those two standards. I'm from the Netherlands. Our head office is in Holland, but we also have offices in Belgium and Sweden, and we basically serve clients all over the world. Our goal is to also be internationally recognized for our expertise in this specific field. So in the case of ITAM, of course, this is a standard that is picking up mostly by larger corporations, the multinationals. So therefore we are also like in contact with a lot of different regions. So why are we here? We are like quite a small certification body if you compare us with our competitors, but like in the beginning of this year, we were contacted by the ITAM Forum, and probably many of you have heard of the ITAM Forum. I'm not sure. Yeah. So the ITAM Forum is an organization founded in 2020 and is led by professionals and experts in the field of IT asset management. And it's also supported by corporation partners that think that IT asset management is very important. And basically the two main objectives of the ITAM Forum is one, to elevate IT asset management in the world, and second, to create a certification scheme for the ISO 19770-1 standard. Because once you have a standard, you also need a mechanism that explains to you how you need to audit this standard. That is why the ITAM Forum reached out to brand compliance to see if we could work together in developing this standard. So brand compliance was also part of the working group 21, and that is what we have done. We have helped develop this certification scheme, and it's called the ISO 19770-11 plus an add-on for specifications. And after this project was finalized, brand compliance was approved by the ITAM Forum to as an exclusive certification body to perform these audits. So at this moment, we are the only certification body worldwide that can perform audits for the for this ISO standard. So what is the ISO 19770-1 framework? Well, it's basically the framework of IT asset management processes, which enables organizations to prove that they are performing IT asset management to the standard sufficient to satisfy corporate governance requirements, and also to support effective effective implementation of those processes within the company. And the standard contains 27 process areas. I won't dive into them. And next to that, it also contains the objectives and also the detailed outcomes to achieve each one of those objectives. Furthermore, it also advocates a tier-based approach, which most of you are also familiar with. And the standard is also broad enough to be implemented in a very extensive environment of technical related companies, also the cloud-based computing. So there exists a family of standards within the 19770 770, and well, they are both focusing on the processes of the IT asset management framework, but also on the technology that is used to manage these software assets and related IT assets. So the 19770-1 is primarily focusing on the ITAM processes framework. There's also a -2, and this is a ITAM data standard that provides especially information about software identification tags for identifying information that is related to installed software and other licensable items within the organization. There's also a -3 that's all about entitlement information. So what are the requirements and limitations and metrics that you need to take into account? The -4 is focusing on the resource utilization measurements, the RUM, and the RUM is basically a standardized structure that is containing usage information about, for example, the resources that are related to the use of IT assets. And the -4 is aligned to be is also aligned to the identification information defined in -2, and also to the entitlement information defined in -3. So together they can enhance also and automate the ITAM processes within a company. Then there's the -5. This standard gives you more of an overview of the family of standards within ISO 19770. It also gives you an introduction to SAM, software asset management, and furthermore, it contains terms and definitions that are used throughout this family of standards. The -8, it defines like general guidelines, approaches, formats that can be used to create a mapping document that is also defining how industry practices map to and from IT asset standards. And then, of course, there is the -11, which is a certification scheme I have already talked about. So the ISO 19770-1 is a management system standard, and it adopts the same management system approach as all the other management system standards, such as 9001, for example, or the 27001. Well, the concept of a management system is sometimes a little bit unclear, vague for anyone who has not been working with management system standards in the first place. But just to be clear, it's not a software, it's not a tool or something like that. It's more a way of working, defining the objectives for your organization and also thinking about how to achieve those objectives, but then in a very structured way. So the management system standards, they are all based on the PDCA cycle approach, which stands for plan, do, check, act. I'm sure that this is a familiar method for most of you. The management system standards, they are all both based on this approach, and they have the same high level structure basically, and therefore it can also be very easy to integrate these management system standards into one management system. So what does the PDCA cycle exactly entails? Basically you start with the plan stage, right? You start thinking about, okay, what IT assets within my organization are important, and how am I going to make sure that I'm in control of those IT assets, and how am I going to make sure that I'm focusing on mitigating risks, right? So you need to think about that on one side. You also need to determine which controls you need to implement within the organization to make sure that you are in control of your IT assets. So in the do stage, you will be implementing those controls within your organization. And after you have finalized that part, you will have to perform internal audits within your organization to see if the controls that you have implemented are also implemented in the right way and also effective. So you have to check in this stage whether the processes are carried out correctly. And for example, you have to also find out if the organization and all the different departments are familiar with, for example, policies. And the results of these internal audits, together with other KPIs, they result in a management review. So this is basically showing you whether or not you are in control of your IT assets. In the act stage, that is basically the stage where you based on the outcome of the internal audits, etc., where you're going to think about, okay, which improvements do I need to implement within my management system, and which processes need to be adjusted. So you will be focusing on that. I'm not sure if you want to ask questions like throughout the presentation, feel free. Otherwise, I will just continue, and maybe afterwards we can have a discussion as well, of course. So how do you start? That's something sometimes very difficult to determine for organizations. Well, implementing a management system standard usually starts with defining the scope for the certification, right? So you need to think about, okay, which IT assets are in scope, but also processes, different departments, even entities within, you can also start small with your scope, and then during an audit process, you can expand your scope. But this overview, which is part of chapter 2, it gives you like a very good view on all the possible IT assets that that are out there, right? They have divided them also in IT asset classes. If you look at the red squares, so it makes it even more clear for you, and this will help you with defining in the first place your scope for the management system.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, of course.
Before the scope, do you find that organisations go for certification for a particular reason? Is it because they want to stand out, be something different compared to other organisations, or what's the primary goal you've seen why people would look at your standard?
I will come to that later on. I will explain a little bit the reasons and the benefits of the certification. But good question. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the scope. The scope, as I understand it, doesn't just have to sort of settle on the IT assets. There could be something geographic. So it could be you're just, if you're an international company, you're just focused on the UK or France. Or
yes,
something.
yes, correct. Yeah, yeah. And like I said, you can also decide later on to, expand the scope and include more regions or entities within the scope. But most often organizations start small just to make it also easier to get it off the ground. Yeah, well, once you have defined your scope, basically you move on to establishing the policies that are related to the IT asset management. This is normally in chapter 5 of the management system, and these policies basically define your organization's plan for achieving those objectives, and to make sure that you are in control of your IT assets, and that those policies will also be available as documented information within the company. It also needs to be actively communicated within the organization. And then it continues with the risk approach. So you have to make a risk analysis for your organization. And what they have done with this standard is that they have not only taken the risks for IT assets, but they have also taken the risks that are related to other business processes. For example, information security and finance. So yeah, when you are implementing the standard, you are basically setting up a management system that is tying in with all the other business processes within your organization.
Could you not move that around in the form of your risk approach would possibly dictate your scope and whether you actually want to certify or not? If your company is very risk averse, you may want to be certified. If you are open to risk,
Yeah. Well, that are questions that you need to ask yourself, right? It's also, an idea to maybe start working with this framework to help you, to identify any risks within your organization, and then maybe, in a couple of years that you are looking more towards obtaining certification. So, yeah, it's not only for in the case you want to be certified, but also helping you.
Bit of a capability assessment side of things.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, then last point, the life cycle approach, which is an add-on in the standard, which is this. This is an annex so what they have done, they have added the life cycle approach in the standard, right? And this annex specifies basically the IT asset management process areas, and also the objectives which you need to take into consideration for inclusion in your IT asset management system. So processes can, of course, either be life cycle or functional, right? So if you look at, for example, the life cycle management processes, those reflect the stages the IT assets within your organization. So it starts with the specification, later on acquisition and development, and it ends with the retirement of your IT assets. Well, the functional process management processes, they in general apply across multiple life cycle processes. For example, the change management, data management, relationship, and contract management. So by implementing the standard, you will also create a document. The statement of applicability is the name, and this documents basically all the inclusions or it states the decisions whether or not you have included the different areas. This is also a little bit comparable with other ISO standards, but then focusing, of course, on the IT assets. Okay, so what are the reasons or benefits to get certified or to implement the standard? Well, of course, it depends also on the organization, right? There are many reasons, but the most common ones, I think, in our opinion at least, are these points. So, implementing an ISO19770-1 standard will help you, of course, to reduce your IT spend by being in control of your IT assets, which helps you to communicate better with your customers, with your partners, but also to be in control of the business objectives and finances, of course, and to also be competitive within your industry. Reducing IT spend will also be stimulated by applying the life cycle approach, which I showed you just now. And this is also saving organizations money, of course. Then the second point, implementing this standard would not only add a great value of IT assets, of course, ensure its value, license compliance, but it will also be useful to reduce a variety of IT-related risks, also security-related risks. The ISO 19770-1 standard, if you implement this standard, it's also helping you to build the foundation for your ISMS, for information security. And the 27,000 standards, 27A standards, they basically force you to look at to know all your IT assets, because you cannot implement the right security controls if you don't know which IT assets you have within your organization. Now, the next point I already mentioned earlier, by implementing this standard, you can also, if you have already a management system in place, you can very easy, expand this management system with more detail regarding your IT assets, because they have the same high-level structure and the same PDCA cycle approach. So this may be also very beneficial, and most larger corporations, they already have a management system in place. Then the next one, implementing this standard will also contribute to operational efficiency by having one single point of IT asset inventory. Assets are often tracked in different locations, in different servers, different programs, and they are not always containing all the right information about the IT assets. So with implementing the standard, you basically also make sure that your IT asset inventory, which is a basic part of any security program, is being kept in one place. Then next point, sustainability. Well, that is has everything to do with the life cycle approach, right? Regardless of the number of automated and manual processes within the company, with this standard, you are really focusing on the recycling of your existing IT assets and software assets, and therefore also contribute to sustainability. And of course, stakeholders, it's also very important or helpful if you can show that you are certified for your stakeholders, because, for example, the board is paying more and more attention to IT asset management in the last couple of years. So yeah, if you want to prove that you are in control of your IT assets, what better way is there than to show a certificate from an external certification body, right? That shows you that you are in control and that you are focusing also on mitigating the risks. But also, for example, the finance department, they want to know if your financial statements are accurate. They want to have an overview of all your IT assets and also your inventory. And of course, the information security department, they rely also on a very good insight in all your IT assets in case of any security breaches. So that's for internal stakeholders, but of course there are also the external stakeholders, such as licensed vendors. Unfortunately, you cannot stop them from coming and performing audits, but each licensed vendor, they have their own specific approach, and each approach is unique and employs its own terminology. And of course, this has also like benefits, right? It stimulates innovation, but on the other side, organizations deal with a lot of different license vendors, all on a separate basis, and this may lead to a significant amount of inefficiencies and makes it also harder to make comparisons. So by implementing this standard, you can somewhat limit these inefficiencies and make comparisons a little bit more easier. Mostly because this is an internationally recognized framework, of course. Last point, also external stakeholders, of course, your customers, right? You have a lot of information about your customers in your databases, and you want also show to them that you're in control of this information, that their information is secured in the right way, that you're in control of all the IT assets, and that the information you have is also accurate. Next, the standard is, of course, internationally recognized for IT asset management, which also enables a common and measurable approach. While at the same time, it also allows organizations to adopt a flexible implementation of the ITAM processes because of the tier-based approach in it. And of course, most important, you want to prove that you're best in class, right? If you have a certificate, then, you have done a good job, I guess, in my opinion. And there are, of course, more benefits, but I think these are the most important ones. So, okay, the certification journey, which is the last topic I will be talking about today. Well, before an audit can take place, of course, you need to implement the standard. The implementation stage, it usually takes up 4 to 6 months. Well, this is on average, right? This is a new standard, relatively new standard, so it may take a little longer in the case of IT asset management, but this is on average the time frame. And what is very important before an audit can take place is that you have at least performed the full PDCA cycle. You cannot skip any stage of that cycle. So when you are ready for a certification, management system standards, they all have the same cycle you go through. So they are conducted according to the same cycle. So in the first year of the cycle, the initial audit takes place. And this initial audit consists of 2 stages. So you have a stage 1 audit, and during this audit, the documented information of the management system will be reviewed and assessed. And we will also be determining whether or not, or to what extent, an organization is ready for the next stage in this process. So also the scope, for example, for the management system will be verified during this stage. And of course, also the process of the PDCA cycle. So, for example, the planning, the execution, the monitoring, the measurements, all of those processes, and in general, the implementation of the management system. About 8 weeks later, and this is also maybe a little longer in the case of the ITAM standard, but on average, 8 weeks later, the second stage can take place. So stage 2 focuses more on the assessment of the implementation and effectiveness of the management system. And it will therefore also focus on the internal processes, and also documented information and evidence will be reviewed, as well as the performance of monitoring, measurement, reporting, and evaluation. Oh, I forgot to go on to the next stage. So yeah, in between the 2 stages, of course, an organization is also given time to adjust and to correct its processes, right? It's not the case that, you know, if you're not past the stage that you cannot go on. There is time to make any adjustments, and as soon as you have passed the 2 stages, the certification committee will be involved. And this committee consists of several independent auditors within brand compliance that basically verify whether the organization has sufficiently demonstrated to meet the set requirements. And thereupon the organization will receive a certificate. The audit cycle entirely consists of several years. So you have the first year, which is the initial certification audit, stage 1 and stage 2. Then year 2, year 3, this is a recertification audit. So it's more, it's not as an extensive audit as the first year. And then year 4 is a recertification audit. But as you can see here, of course, as well as the pre-audit, we normally perform pre-audits as an optional step in the process. But in the case of the IT asset management standard, we have made it a mandatory step in the process because, well, this is new, not only for organizations, for us as well, but the pre-audit is therefore a mandatory step in this process. So what is the purpose of a pre-audit? It's basically reviewing, assessing where an organization stands in terms of the implementation of this standard. So you will be able to better prepare for the official certification process. So these are 2 separate processes, right? It's not the case that if you enter in a pre-audit that you will have to move on to the certification process. This is entirely separate. So you can either decide to do a pre-audit and then a few months later start with the certification process. You can also decide to not start with the certification process or maybe like a year later, or so another moment. So these are 2 separate stages, and the results of the pre-audit will be all documented in a report. So the report will include information, general information about the certification process of brand compliance. It will also include an assessment of the management system, of course, also a verified scope. It will also give the organization an estimate onto how much time they will need to actually get ready for certification, and it will also give you an estimate on the time that is needed to conduct these audits. Furthermore, it can be supplemented with other observations and conclusions, of course. So this is the whole certification journey in short. Well, thank you for listening. This was my part of today.